Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind Headlines, and in this programme we shall be asking, is Hamas influencing British elections? As on Tuesday the 2nd of May, England had local authority elections plus mayoral elections, and what we saw there was 40 councillors were elected on a pro-Palestinian platform. And so I'll be asking, what does this mean for our Jewish community? What does this mean for our democracy? And what does this mean for the future of our nation, Great Britain? Reagan, great to have you back on Behind Headlines. I know that you've had a great time in Israel and you're back in the hot seat, so it's good to see you back.
It's good to be back, and what a story to come back to. Very timely, very relevant. I was keeping up with a few of these things from afar while being in Jerusalem. Certainly it was interesting to hear the perspective of people in Israel on the UK, and the expression translated mess was used by one Hebrew speaking gentleman I was speaking with, and so a French background Jew, and I was just discarding the UK as a total mess essentially. And I think when we look at the results of the elections, the local elections last week, we see, yes, inarguable gains for Labour, but the big story is really those gains among independents, Greens, Lib Dems, particularly candidates who were particularly standing in a local election, not national election, on a pro-Gaza, pro-Palestine platform.
Even a pro-Hamas platform as well.
An anti-Israel platform.
Exactly, which we'll unpack later. So let's just remind ourselves of these key events that occurred last week. So what we saw is that the real impact that Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza is having upon the Muslim community in this country, and particularly they're using the war in Gaza as a rallying cry in which to rally behind and to flex their political muscles. So we're now seeing that Hamas is having an influence, particularly on those Muslim communities which belong to the Labour Party. These are Labour Party constituencies with big Muslim majorities, and we've seen them pretty much desert the Labour Party in the local elections. We also see that on Thursday, the 2nd of May, England had the local authority elections together with the mayoral elections, both in Manchester as well as the West Midlands and also in London. The Daily Mail reports that some pro-Palestinian campaigners have been elected as councillors as the war in Gaza hits towns and halls across Britain, and that more than 40 councillors were elected in England after making the conflict part of their campaign. Some of the rosettes in the colours were worn in the colours of the Palestinian flag. Others dedicated their victories to the people of Gaza. The Labour leadership was shocked at the local elections to see that many of the Labour traditional heartlands with big Muslim majorities are deserting the party on their stance on Israel and its war against Hamas in Gaza. We see that here that local elections at Gaza and the Palestinian cause has been the rallying cry that's mobilised Muslim voters to elect independent councillors who share the same worldview as Hamas. Now Vote Muslim has thrown down the gauntlet to the Labour Party with 18 policy demands to ensure that they win the Islamic vote at this year's forthcoming general election. And we also see that you also visited Ramallah, didn't you? And you sent me pictures of actually in Ramallah that you can buy Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, in a bookshop.
It's just openly there on the street. It's a bestseller across many Arab nations, but to have it there on the open street as sort of a political treatise to inspire and educate on how to deal with the Jews is absolutely horrifying. There were posters, propaganda everywhere, Hamas posters, propaganda everywhere. People say, oh, well, the stuff in Gaza has nothing to do with the West Bank and what's going on over there. And I ask you, maybe if you have that view, have you actually been? Have you been to any of these places at all? Have you observed them face to face with your own eyes? I saw throughout the streets of Ramallah propaganda, posters, demonizing Israel, portraying anti-Semitic imagery, espousing extreme debunked conspiracy theories against the Jews. And this was a par for the course alongside praise of the so-called martyrs who they say are paving the road to Al-Quds in Jerusalem with their blood and doubtless the blood of their innocent, in many cases, victims. So what we have to realize is, Simon, when we're seeing this platform being stood upon in our local elections, when we're seeing and hearing cries of Allahu Akbar after a victory at these elections, the same cries were uttered by the terrorists when they were taking the lives of those some 1,200 civilians in Israel on October the 7th. The same chant is used routinely whenever there's some perceived loss to Israel or some perceived victory of an Islamic nation or individual terrorist against a Jew in the land.
And of course we've seen the shouts of Al Akbar sadly in Nigeria. We've seen those shouts by ISIS in Syria and also Iraq when they went on their murderish pillage against Christians in northern Iraq. We hear it from Palestinian terrorists, from Hezbollah terrorists. I mean, essentially, this is kind of the Islamic rallying call. So to actually win Leeds council election, local assembly election, wrap yourself around the Palestinian flag and shout Al Akbar. I mean, that should put chills into the hearts of government and into the British population to realise, here we go, we have someone who's elected to office of responsibility, a political office of being a councillor in Leeds, with authority, holding the same Islamic viewpoint as Hamas. I mean, that is really quite frightening.
Yeah, he went on a vile rant against a rabbi who had to return to fulfill his reserve duty requirement, and upon this being discovered, I mean, some of the stuff that he said is completely unrepeatable on air. The Greens were notified, they were told about this months ago. This has been exposed, and though this individual wins, now it all comes back. They say, oh, we knew nothing about this, which is completely dishonest. In some cases, maybe you could say there's just a degree of naivety or disingenuity.
So again, we see this mixture of the hard left, don't we? And the Green Party is of the hard left, but also then they find common ground on the whole issue of Palestine and Gaza, and as a direct result, they're able to form alliance despite the fact that this councillor holds some absolutely hideous anti-Semitic views. The Daily Mail reports this week as well that under the headline, dozens of pro-Gaza activists are elected to councils across Britain as fears that the Middle East conflict will dominate many town halls after the Muslim group issues Starmer with 18 demands, and we'll talk about that a bit later. See that dozens of pro-Palestinian campaigners have been elected as councillors as the war in Gaza has hit town halls across Britain. More than 40 councillors were elected in England. After making the conflict part of their campaign, the analysis from Thursday's vote actually shows. Some wore rosettes with the colours of the Palestinian flags, while others declared their victory to the people of Gaza. I mean, firstly, councils are not in charge of British foreign policy. No. They have no foreign policy mandate. I mean, here they are there to clean up the roads. They are there to collect our rubbish. They are to provide services for the local community, such as building projects. They are not there to be the voice of the cause of the Islamist community, who have only one unifying goal, as it were, and that's the eradication of the State of Israel. That's the only thing that unites them, and yet we see that this is being brought into our councils across England, and we also see that I think the Labour Party are shocked at the way these traditional Muslim voters, and particularly in the kind of northern strongholds of the Labour Party that hold big and large Muslim constituencies, such as Bradford in West Yorkshire, places in Birmingham and Blackburn, are now deserting the Labour Party. And we see now that they're beginning to flex their political muscles, as well as the impact of George Galloway's party, which was able to elect, 4 councillors under his banner. So we're seeing that this could have a huge impact come our general election whenever Rishi Sunak declares it. And it looks like now it's either going to be an autumn or winter election.
In at least 12 of the town halls, we see these pro-Palestine campaigners defeated Labour candidates, prompting opposition leader Sir Kier Starmer to pledge to win back the trust of voters alienated over his stance on the issue. Last night, senior Tories said that they feared the elections will mean town halls end up being dominated by debates over foreign affairs rather than local services. Ex-cabinet minister Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg told the Mail, "People are entitled to their views, but foreign affairs is a matter for the House of Commons, not local councils. This is a consequence of the left's attempt to segment society and create a coalition of minorities rather than a unified whole. This is very divisive for the country at large." Former Home Office Minister Sir John Hayes added, "I find it disturbing when you have people standing for election not because they care about making a contribution to building a better Britain, but because they are more interested in events overseas. It's important that people can express their views on foreign affairs, but that should not be the basis for standing to govern a local authority." Sir Kier suffered the biggest rebellion of his leadership in November when 10 frontbenchers resigned or quit over his refusal to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. But Thursday's local elections were the first time that large numbers of pro-Palestine campaigners have stood for election, mostly in areas of the Northwest with large Muslim populations. This will lead to concerns about growing sectarianism in British politics. In Oldham, for instance, independent candidates won 8 of the 21 seats available, with several of them explicitly campaigning in support of Palestine. Pendle, Lancashire, pro-Palestinian independents won 5 of the 12 seats up for grabs.
And of course, we're going to see more and more of this. We're seeing really that the Labour Party itself can no longer kind of reflects the values, I would say, of the British Muslim population, because we know that Kier Starmer and the front bench within the Labour Party definitely have a very kind of liberal perspective on so many of the big social issues. Plus also we know that Kier Starmer has tried to move the Labour Party away from the direction that Jeremy Corbyn took the party in, which was one incredibly antagonistic towards Israel. He couldn't even mention the name Israel when he was leader of the Labour Party. And of course, then there was all the scandals to do with Jew hatred within the party. But really effectively, we're saying that this is a huge part of the Labour Party constituency. So when voters go to the polls, whenever they are, whether it's autumn or winter, they have to seriously think about the implication of what happens if Kier Starmer and the Labour Party actually win the keys to 10 Downing Street, and what will be the makeup of their government, and who will be in office, who will be their MPs, and what direction will the Labour Party take. And this is why, for example, Kier Starmer has a very difficult choice in his hands. Either he bows to the Islamist mob in order to try and win their vote in the forthcoming election, or he takes that moral courage and say these views do not represent the values of the Labour Party, and therefore showing that he has that capability and credibility to be a good leader and a good Prime Minister.
And what we've seen in some of those Labour strongholds, Simon, is collapse. People are talking, yes, of course, about the Conservative collapse. They're talking about Sunak's failure to rally voters. If you consider even in London, the percentage of voter turnout was very poor, and had people actually voted, turned up to vote in a way that was, perhaps those who are critical of Sir Kier Starmer and who have been a voice in one way on these issues, had there been more voter turnout, maybe some results would have been different. But what we have here is a very well-oiled, a very well-functioning machine, funded, I'm sure, in many cases by external backing. People certainly who are supporting these campaigners essentially in their role, highly motivated to get out and to get people voting for them. Places like Bradford, it shouldn't come as a surprise really in this sort of climate when 9 of the 30 seats go to independents. 7 who campaigned directly because they criticized Labour fully in regard to its Gaza stance or made pro-Palestinian statements. Again, emphasizing this is a local election. It has nothing to do with Gaza. There's no protocol for any relevance of foreign policy in this particular election, but it may be a sign of what's to come later on this year in the general election.
No, absolutely. So let's go to one of the top stories of this week. It was related to this story. This is the moment that the Green Party councillor shouted Allah Akbar after being elected. So we have Mohsin Ali, who's 42. Vowed to raise the voice of Palestine when he won the Gipton and Hare Hill seat in Leeds. A video was posted on TikTok, there he is there in front of us, shows Ali being declared the winner before he burst into speech as 2 men hold a Palestinian flag behind him. He said he ran for election for the community of Gipton and Hare Hills, who are fed up of being let down by the Labour Council. Then he went on to say, we are fed up of being taken for granted, who are fed up with being neglected by this rotten council, he continued. This is a win for the people of Gaza. We will not be silent. We will raise the voice of Gaza. We will raise the voice of Palestine, Allah Akbar. He also then posted on his own video on his TikTok page with the caption, the results for Gipton and Hare Hills is a huge win for our community. We've been neglected for far too long. It's time to start working to build our community up again. Our community has rejected the Labour Party's support of the genocide in Gaza, and we can also see here on the front page of the Daily Mail in our recording here the same councillor saying how could Greens not know about a vile rant over a rabbi. Party leader claims ignorance about councillor in anti-Semitism row despite the Mayor's expose months ago. So what we're seeing really come to the fore, isn't it? It is how this issue of Israel's war, which is a defensive war to protect the nation of Israel and the people of Gaza from this genocidal terrorist organisation, Hamas. But this war has been used to kind of mobilise Islamic public opinion around the world. And we're seeing that this is a rallying call. This is a rallying call for the Muslim community to rally behind, to mobilise, to flex their political muscle and to take power. So anyone thinking that, and this is I think the sad state of affairs within our government and within our society, because we have very much destroyed our Judeo-Christian heritage and there's not much left of it. Our political leaders and those of our civil service have a kind of secular liberal mindset who don't understand that within the Islamic faith there is a huge element that, of politics involved, with political ambitions and with political aims. And those aims are to bring in Sharia law in this nation to become a nation under Islam. Sadly, what we're seeing now, today, is the impact of decades of failing to actually recognise where this threat comes, because sadly these people don't reflect the same views as those who want peace, want prosperity, who don't want to be controlled by an Islamic dictatorship.
Mohsin Ali is not alone in this particular story. Candidates across northern Britain were elected to councils specifically because of their support for the Palestinian cause. Khalil Khan, who campaigned as a pro-Palestinian independent candidate in the Thameside council elections in Greater Manchester, defeated the long-serving Labour incumbent Dave McNally. His campaign website reads, "The Labour Party's failure to declare the Israeli actions in Gaza a potential genocide is a disgrace. It was one of 2 seats Labour lost to an independent. Law graduate Aisha Khuser was one of 8 independent candidates to win a seat on Oldham Council, also in Greater Manchester. Ms. Khuser was among several candidates to express her support for Palestine while running for election, and included the red, white, green and black flag on her campaign material, which again, bizarre. It's a local election. It has nothing to do with local policy at all. I do wonder what their particular policies on rubbish removal, on the fixing of potholes, and the opening or closure of local libraries and community centers is, or if they've thought about things like budget for those local and public services. This is what a local election is about. It has nothing to do with foreign policy. And frankly, Simon, I feel like our system has strangely allowed this election to become a little bit of a joke, and I think it's put many councils at risk of having individuals who are incompetent to carry out their responsibilities.
Yeah, but I think what we can see now is that if Israel's war against Hamas continues into the autumn, into the winter, which it may well do because Israel has to deal with the threat posed by Hezbollah in the north of Israel, once Israel's cleaned up its military operation to destroy Hamas in Gaza, this is not going away anytime soon. So we could actually see the impact of the local election have a huge impact on the general election. And we'll see that this could really dent Labour's chances of forming and becoming the next government, because they could end up losing a lot of big seats, big Labour majority seats that have large Muslim populations, because the Labour Party no longer reflects the views of the Muslim community. Plus also they are united on one single issue, and that's the issue of Israel and the Palestinian cause. So let's just remind ourselves of the kind of latest developments in Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza by watching this excellent report put together by friends at CBN as Israel launches its ground offensive into Rafah in southern Gaza.
Hamas announced the latest ceasefire talks have ended. The terror group insists on 2 key demands. 1, the end of the war, and 2, Israel completely pulls out of the Gaza Strip. Both are non-starters for Israel. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant addressed troops about the talks.
We are recognizing worrisome signals that Hamas is not planning to accept any deal or agreement with us. And that means the operation in Rafah and in the entire Gaza Strip in the very near future.
As a prelude to the incursion into Rafah, the IDF is sending leaflets telling civilians to leave for a humanitarian zone Israel is preparing for their safety. On Sunday, Hamas launched a rocket attack on Israeli soldiers at the Kerem Shalom crossing for humanitarian aid. The attack killed 4 soldiers and wounded 9. Despite the continued attacks by the terror group, the Biden administration objects to any incursion into the last major Hamas stronghold. And Axios is reporting that the U.S. stopped a shipment of ammunition. Israel also closed the Qatar-based Al Jazeera News Bureau, calling it a Hamas mouthpiece that undermines the nation's security. At the annual commemoration for the Holocaust Sunday night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu compared Israel's current struggle to the Holocaust.
Today, we again confront enemies bent on our destruction. I say to the leaders of the world, no amount of pressure, no decision by any international forum will stop Israel from defending itself.
Israel stands at a defining moment in its history, and Netanyahu pledged, if necessary, the Jewish state will stand alone.
As the Prime Minister of Israel, the one and only Jewish state, I pledge here today from Jerusalem on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, if Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone.
On Monday morning, a siren sounded throughout the country. Traffic stopped and Israelis stood in silence to remember the 6 million who died in the Holocaust. With the number of threats surrounding Israel and the alarming rise of global anti-Semitism, some see an ominous parallel between Israel in 2024 and the 1930s in Germany. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Always grateful to our friends at CBN for their efficient reporting, and we remain grateful for their active reporting, particularly on the ongoing conflict there between Israel and Gaza. The Spectator carries an article by Dr. Rakib Hassan under the title of Ahmed Yaqub's West Midlands result should worry Labour. Labour has gained councillors across England and won bellwether councils such as Nuneaton and Bedworth and Milton Keynes. It has also lost some of its traditional Muslim support to George Galloway's Workers' Party of Britain, the WPB, and pro-Palestine Muslim independent candidates. From the industrial Lancastrian town of Blackburn to inner-city Bradford in West Yorkshire, the Palestinian effect has seen a surge of independent Muslim councillors elected largely at the expense of Labour. But arguably, the independent pro-Gaza challenger who has landed the fiercest uppercut to Labour's chin is one who is not even elected. The West Midland mayoral candidate, Ahmed Yaqub, while Labour won the mayoralty from Andy Street, the Tory, Yaqub managed to gain 69,000 votes across the region.
Which is extraordinary. And I mean, the Labour Party were actually fearful that because of Yaqub's campaign, and let's not forget he didn't have any kind of backing of a major political party like the Conservative or the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats, was able to pull in almost 70,000 votes, almost gave a victory to Andy Street, the Conservative mayor of the West Midlands, but Labour just kind of scraped through in that election. I think it was a very short number of votes. So what we're seeing here, if he had a better financed campaign, more money kind of backing him, more publicity, then no doubt he would have been the West Midlands mayor, but who's also standing as a parliamentary candidate as well. So we'll see how, for example, in the coming months, how constituencies with big Muslim populations will actually vote. Will they reject the Labour Party over its stance on Israel? And let's be fair, the Labour Party, even though Kier Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, has completely distanced himself from Jeremy Corbyn and the Corbynistas within the party, he has tried to tackle head-on the toxic Jew hatred scandals that have denied the Labour Party victory at the last general election back in 2019, showing that he's a kind of progressive party. But at the same time, we realise that there are so many within the Labour Party that hold those views. And his stance in Israel has been strong, but not strong enough. I mean, he's as soon as Biden came out and said that there needs to be a ceasefire, he's come up and followed suit. And, you know, he's known as being a flip-flopper because he keeps flip-flopping on his policies. Yeah. So if there is a bit of pressure placed on him, he could cave to the Islamist mob, which would be very dangerous for our parliamentary democracy and our freedom if he does. So he needs to stand firm. But also talks about here regarding Yaqub, according to The Spectator, that he's a criminal defence lawyer, received the backing from George Galloway, and who wants friends like those? He was seeking to win over traditionally Labour voting Muslims who believe Labour has essentially supported the Israeli collective punishment of Gaza and largely overlooked the planned creation of further illegal settlements in the West Bank. But they completely ignore the horrors committed by Hamas of October the 7th. They completely ignore the genocide, the mass rapes, the killing of innocent people, the maiming of individuals, and what happened at the Nova Music Festival was absolutely horrific. And yet there is no condemnation for Hamas whatsoever on what they did. So in other words, if you don't condemn Hamas, you're effectively supporting Hamas. And that's the danger that we're in.
Well, he's going to have another shot at it, so to speak, as he's a prospective parliamentary candidate for Birmingham Ladywood, which has been represented by Labour MP and current Shadow Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood since 2010. It should worry Labour that Yaqub, who received little mainstream media coverage and simply wouldn't have had the scale of resources available to him that the establishment party candidates usually enjoy, did manage to win nearly 43,000 votes in Birmingham compared to Labour's 80,000 votes. The Labour Party source commented to the BBC that it's the Middle East, not West Midlands, that will have won Andy Street the mayoralty. Once again, Hamas are the real villains. Put aside the fact that you can both support the cause of Palestinian statehood and reject Hamas on the grounds of it being a proscribed terrorist organization, the source providing a telling insight into the way some in the Labour Party believe they are owed the votes of British Muslims. While the likes of Labour National Campaign Coordinator Pat McFadden have said that Labour will work hard to win back voters who've distanced themselves from the party over the conflict in Gaza, there are British Muslim voters who perhaps need to take stock and ask themselves why they supported the party for as long and enthusiastically as they did. Sure, the Conservatives have had their fair share of anti-Muslim problems, and Labour may be seen as the fair and tolerant party, but in the modern Labour Party, cultural liberals dominate. Few in the party champion family values, the sanctity of life, and the positivity of faith in British civil society. So the expectation is that this so-called Gaza effect will broaden into a wider conversation in Muslim communities about their fundamental tensions with the Labour Party. The question many asking is if there is space for religious social conservatism in Starmer's party, particularly when that is Islamic in nature.
Absolutely, and also we see that the Daily Telegraph actually reports that the Muslim Vote, which is an Islamic organisation, has thrown down the gauntlet to Kier Starmer's leadership, telling what he has to do in order to win the Islamic vote at the next general election. So the Daily Mail reports on the headline, a Muslim group issues Starmer with demands to win back lost votes over Gaza campaign, tells Labour leader he must commit to real action if he wants to rebuild trust with pro-Palestinian voters. And it says here that the Muslim Pressure Group has issued Kier Starmer with a list of 18 demands, including ending military ties with Israel, to win back voters who abandoned Labour over Gaza, the Muslim Vote, a campaign to get Muslim voters to back pro-Palestinian candidates, told the Labour leader that he must commit to real action and deliver on its request if he is serious about this pledge to rebuild trust with those who are angered by his stance on the conflict. So let's go and really see what those points are. So the Muslim Vote Pressure Group, these are the 18 orders that they've ordered for Labour Party. So number one, apologise for your comments, green-lighting a genocide and for not backing the ceasefire in October, November of 2023.
And number two, sanctions on companies operating in occupied territories, sanctions on settlers as well. Number three, recognize the Palestine state. Number four, travel ban on all Israeli politicians that prosecuted this war and support illegal occupation. Number five, end military ties with Israel. 6, issue guidance that Muslims are allowed to pray at school. 7, implement findings of People's Review of Prevent, not Shawcross. 8, remove extremism definition that Gov introduced. Commit to full implementation of Royal Charter, RE media regulation, that's number 9. Number 10, adopt APPG definition of Islamophobia. 11, commit to review of public sector equality duty.
Number 12, increase council and public health funding for 10% of the most deprived areas in the country to finally address systematic and chronic health inequalities as detailed in the Marmont Review. and revisited by the Health Foundation 10 years later. Number 13, to deliver alternative student finance. Number 14, ensure Sharia-compliant pensions are available at every workplace, so the 1/3 of Muslims without a pension gets one. 5, ensure insurance quotes don't cost more for someone called Muhammad. 16, commit 7% of local government pension schemes and public sector pensions to ethical and Islamic funds. 17, oppose the boycott, divestment and a sanctions bill and allow public bodies to boycott Israel. And 18, remove the archaic spiritual influence offence from the statute. So here we go. I mean, this is I think everything you need to know about the agenda of these people, Reagan, because firstly, Gaza, the war in Gaza is used as a pretext for Islamicization. This is what this is about. Let's use the issue of Gaza to mobilize our Islamic community to say, if you want our vote at the next general election, which is coming up in only a few months' time, then this is what Kier Starmer has to do to reassure us. But again, this is a kind of pretext for the Islamicization of the country. I mean, why else would you suddenly put off the fact that you don't want to be prescribed on the extremist list that Michael Gove has put up? Why do you want to ensure Sharia-compliant pensions are available at every workplace? Why commit 7% of local government pension schemes and public funding sectors to ethical and Islamic funds when we know that many Islamic funds and monies have been raised has been used to fund terrorism, to fund Hamas and other terrorist organisations in their war against Israel? So here we see, for example, this is almost a blueprint for an Islamic takeover of the country, and this is what these people want. But they're using the issue of Israel and Gaza as a pretext in order to expand their political vision and their political power.
Well, the Muslim Vote UK doesn't stop just with 18. They list 18, but they actually, on the social media outlet X, formerly called Twitter, said there's more, but that'll do for starters. And so this is only the beginning of it. Our asks are sophisticated and we built consensus around them. Your sorrowful non-statements no longer cut it. So the level of disdain that this particular group has for Labour, and it was obvious, Simon, we've talked about how both the left and radical Islam, they've had this very weird, incompatible marriage for so many times. And now we're seeing the two reach ahead. They're reaching a point where there's going to be a rift, there's a separation. The question was which side was going to win out. That was the discussion, right? Which side would come out better. And what we're seeing here is now the Muslim Vote UK, the organisation, is severing its ties, and it looks like Labour is really between a rock and a hard place here in regards to what they're going to do. We'll have to see what happens in the coming days, but this comes as Pat McFadden, Labour's campaign chief, has acknowledged Sir Keir's approach to the conflict has cost the party votes at the local elections. So as lacking as we may have felt some of Sir Kier Starmer's statements in some ways in its support for Israel in an unequivocal way, it has, what he did say, has actually cost him Islamist votes.
So let's just unpack what they are demanding, starting with number one. So firstly, they want an apology for comments made greenlighting a genocide and for not backing the ceasefire on October and November 2023. So in other words, what they're saying is that they want the Labour Party and its leadership, Kier Starmer, to come forward and apologise for comments that what Hamas did on October the 7th was genocide. That's the first thing, which you and I know that that was genocide, the worst massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust over 80 years ago. They also then said that the Labour Party did not back a ceasefire back in October, November 2023. Now, if you remember, and our viewers remember rightly, it was almost 3 to 4 weeks since Israel launched its military incursion into Gaza to destroy Hamas. So this time frame, Israel is still reeling from the aftermath of the horrors that took place on October 7th.
It hardly begun any response.
No. So the only military operation going on at this time was the mopping up of the Hamas terrorists who committed the atrocities on October the 7th. Number two, sanctions on companies operating in the occupied territories and sanctions on settlers. Again, we're talking about Jewish communities living in the biblical heartland of Israel, which is Judea and Samaria. So that is when it comes to Israel's legitimacy of all of Israel's towns and cities, these have the most legitimacy because this is where we get the term Jews from, Judea. Number three, they want to recognize a Palestinian state when even the Palestinian leadership themselves don't actually want a state because they want to perpetuate the conflict. So here we are, recognition of a Palestinian state without the state actually being able to function as a state, and without the legal framework of the Oslo Accords between the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves to come to a peace agreement. Also, they want to put a travel ban on all Israeli politicians that prosecuted this war and support illegal occupation. Now, surely, when you see that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, Israel is the only country in the Middle East that offers its people freedom and has institutions of democracy, and that Israel, like any other Western nation, once it's attacked, has the right to self-defense. And yet what we should be saying is that anyone who supports Hamas should be taken to The Hague for crimes against humanity and war crimes and crimes of genocide. And, we need to find those responsible, including the Iranian regime, for the horrors that took place on October the 7th. So there's none of this do they recognise any responsibility in terms of Hamas's role of committing genocide on October the 7th, nor do they recognise the Jew hatred that they are stirring up and the pain and devastation that they are causing to the Jewish community, or the fact that they are actually threatening our own democracy and our kind of values. And they want to end military ties with Israel. Now, Israel is one of the strongest military forces in the Middle East and is a beacon of light in a dark region of the world. And without Israel's presence and military presence in the Middle East, Europe would have been invaded by these Islamic hordes decades ago.
And the issue that we're having here, Simon, is years of naivety, years of disingenuity, years of giving away ground, making concessions, equivocating, pandering to perhaps more seemingly at the time moderate voices on these type issues, trying to both sides everything, sitting on the fence. Now we have everything in broad daylight. Yep. And it's too late? Is it too late for Labour to stand up and show some principle? Will Sir Kier respond to this in a way that says, okay, actually, you know what, we can actually do without the support of radical Islamist extremists who support terror groups? Yeah. That's the sort of character. I have not voted for any mainstream political party. I've had no intention to in the coming days. But this is the sort of thing that some people would be looking to hear from a mainstream political candidate. A little bit of character, a little bit of principle to say we can live quite without the support and endorsement of those who support terror.
That's showing leadership. I don't know if he'll show that. Number 7, it says here, implement findings of People's Review of Prevent, not Shawcross. So in other words, they don't want to be investigated with links to extremism and terrorism. They want to continue to incite, promote jihad, to promote violence, to openly express their anti-Semitic views without prosecution, without the government investigating them. So that's another kind of process of Islamization. They also want to remove extremism definition from Michael Gove introduced. So again, it's like we don't want to be investigated by the government, nor do we want to be investigated by the police. We want to continue to promote jihad and terrorism and violence and introduce Sharia law without the government actually investigating the fact that we are considered moderates and we shouldn't be branded as an extremist. They also then say they want to commit to a full implementation of the Royal Charter regarding media regulations, and they want to adopt the all-party parliamentary group definition of Islamophobia. Now, look, it is wrong to call any religion or race of people out and show kind of racist remarks, which is bigotry. But when you are openly displaying and discussing anti-Semitic tropes, and then once you get called out on that, and then you hide behind Islamophobia, that's the problem with this definition of why they want to change. So they want that freedom to express many of their kind of anti-Semitic tropes without the fear of prosecution, and then you get labelled as being an Islamophobe because you actually are investigating what's being said. So here we see a kind of threat to freedom of expression and freedom of speech.
Well, the following definition and the APPG definition on it is a little bit more expansive, but it contains the following definition. Islamophobia is rooted in racism. It is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. And the question about why this, there may be concerns of implementing this in the fullest way relate primarily to Islamic ideology and the fact that it is tragically a part of Islamic ideology to support jihad, for instance. It's there in the Quran, it's there in the Hadith, to openly discuss some of the concerning elements of the Quran and its teaching, and to openly discuss some of the very troubling accounts recorded in the Hadith of behavior, including by the Prophet Muhammad. That would really fall afoul of this definition of Islamophobia.
Absolutely. So let's go and see this report produced by our friends at CBN, dating back to 2012, and you can see how much times have moved on in 12 years.
Muslims Against the Crusades is the controversial group proposing that 2 towns in Yorkshire and 1 in East London be turned into states ruled only by Islamic law, entirely outside British common law. Even a Muslim imam says any plans to enforce Sharia law in the UK are completely ridiculous.
The idea of bringing Sharia here, it's a total non-starter. It's nothing but a publicity stunt. Most Muslims, the vast bulk of law-abiding, productive citizens in this country, do not wish to have Sharia law here. If we wanted Sharia law, we would go to a country that practices Sharia law.
And Christian leaders here in Bradford, one of the towns affected by the proposal, are deeply disturbed by the plan.
The Dean of Bradford Cathedral, David Ison, told CBN News.
What worries me about it is that it frightens people in the country, because although it's a very small group, very extreme group, they try and get as much publicity for their cause as they can. And it worries people, the idea that somehow that we're all going to be subject to Sharia law, even though it's never going to happen.
Terry Quinn is on a mission to relaunch Smith Wigglesworth's Boland Street mission in this Islamic area of Bradford.
Well, I'm concerned with any extremist group because at the Wigglesworth Centre it goes against everything we're doing, building fantastic relationship with the Muslim people. Our landlord is a Muslim, and many Muslims in this area are welcoming everything we are doing at this Wigglesworth Centre. So the extremist group and their opinions don't represent what the Muslims in Bradford really believe.
And Government Councillor for Bradford, Ian Greenwood, also believes these proposals don't represent the wishes of the Muslim population there.
Clearly they do not speak for the vast majority of Muslims. They certainly don't speak for the vast majority of people, and we have to treat them with the contempt really that they deserve.
Christians are fighting the proposal, saying Islamic law isn't compatible with Britain's Christian heritage and values. Last month, Baroness Caroline Cox introduced a bill into the House of Lords to protect Muslim women from abuses under Sharia law.
In Britain, we have a country where many people have died to protect the democratic freedoms enshrined in our laws and in our culture. And we now have allowed an alternative quasi-legal system to develop in our land, which is fundamentally incompatible with those democratic freedoms, and where many citizens, especially women, are suffering as a result.
The Christian Institute is fully behind this campaign, and the head of communications, Mike Judge, says this latest announcement is proof that Islamists are seeking to impose their extremist views on British society.
There are some British Muslims who want to impose Sharia law on their communities, and that's precisely why we're backing Lady Cox's bill in the House of Lords. Her bill will stop Sharia law taking root as a parallel legal system, and it's going to ensure that there is equality before the law, particularly for vulnerable Muslim women.
Though this proposal may seem unlikely, Christians say it's important to stand against the increasing Islamic influence in their nation. Peter Wooding for CBN News, Bradford, England.
Well, just a blast from the past 12 years ago there with Peter Wooding. And, you know, times have progressed and they've changed beyond that. This has escalated even more than where it was at that time. But Simon, this has been going on. The trajectory was already set. We've been seeing the foundation stones laid for where we're at today over the course of the past few decades, really. And that's what makes any course correction at this point particularly difficult for those who are of a political slant.
No, absolutely, and again, this provides the Islamist dilemma within the leadership of the Labour Party of how they come to terms with the election results, even though that they won the vast majority of council seats in the England elections, and obviously did very well in the mayoral elections. They retained Manchester with Andy Burnham. They won West Midlands, and of course they held London with Sadiq Khan. But the big issue that they face really is how do they go from here? Do they risk losing the Muslim vote by being sympathetic to Israel and actually then supporting Israel in a war against Hamas in Gaza after the horrors of October the 7th, knowing that those same horrors can come here if we don't defend Israel and the Jewish people? Now, what's really interesting is that the Daily Mail have done a very good editorial of points which they ask of Sir Kier Starmer in light of 40 seats being won on a pro-Palestinian platform. So this one is called The Perils of Pandering to Sectarian Politics. Quite what Leeds City Council is supposed to do about the war in Gaza, or why it should have any part in the role of a local councillor, was unclear, but Mr Ali's election was not some eccentric one-off. In a raft of northern wards with large Muslim communities, Labour was forced out by a loose affiliation of independent and Green candidates, united more by loathing of Israel than any concerns about local transport or bin collection. In some areas, Labour's vote fell by 40%, giving Sir Kier Starmer a serious electoral headache. He says he wants to win back the trust of pro-Palestinians, but how far would he go to do it? And that's the question. As we have seen from the swastikas brandished at marches across the country, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism often go hand in hand. So what would the Labour leader be prepared to do to turn a blind eye to bigotry for short-term political gain? And if he did not support a permanent Israeli ceasefire, what would the zealots demand next? Recognition of Hamas? An embargo on trade with Israel? The Labour leader has a sorry record of flip-flopping on major issues. If he is to retain any moral credibility, he must stand firm on this one. Pandering to sectarianism would be an affront to democracy and a betrayal of British Jews. It would also torpedo his claim to have purged Labour of anti-Semitism. Superb editorial.
It really is, and I do wonder what Sir Kier would make of it if he's read it, if someone's gotten this challenge to him. I mean, what do you think, Simon? Do you think that Sir Kier is going to take any of this to heart? Do you think that there will be any sense of principle going forward? Because the reality is he's going to alienate someone, and that's what many politicians, especially these days, fail to realize. They are trying to attract everyone to some degree, rather than standing on principle, standing on character.
But I think what he kind of realises that many of his own Labour MPs hold the same views. They share the same outlook. They are very pro-Palestinian to the extent that they are don't see Israel's narrative or point of view, don't realise that Israel as a nation is fighting for its existence against a global Islamist terrorist organisation supported by the Iranian regime. So he knows he has that within the party. He has a Jewish wife, and he celebrates Shabbat every Friday night. So there is a huge Jewish influence within Kier Starmer in his thinking and his outlook. He clearly knows that if he panders to the Islamists, he won't be elected. But the big question over Kier Starmer is that, as the Mail says, he flip-flops on major policy decisions. So, this could be the making or the breaking of it. And what he should effectively say, if he wants to sound prime ministerial, is to say, we don't need people like this in the Labour Party. We don't need their votes, because we want to stand for decency. We want to stand for morality. We want to stand for truth. And I will not cower to the Islamist mob.
Well, Simon, thank you so much for this program. And we do pray and trust, viewers, that you will have been encouraged and stimulated to think more deeply on this important topic. Let's continue to pray for our nation. Let's continue to pray against the forces of evil. Let's continue to trust in our Savior, Jesus Christ, who ultimately has the victory. Thanks again, Simon, and look forward to more next time on Behind the Headlines.